Welcome to the South Florida Writers Association's Virtual Authors Showcase, a virtual experience. My name is Billy Jones. I'm a proud member of the South Florida Writers Association. Thank you for joining us and celebrating our authors. This month, it is with great pleasure that I introduce my colleague, Fernando Cabrera, and his latest work. But before you meet him, I'd just like to remind you of our purpose, what this showcase is, and how you can continue to support the efforts of South Florida Writers Association. The South Florida Writers Association is a nonprofit organization that celebrates published, emerging, and traditional authors. So whether you are a children's writer, into horror, an essayist, all the same, we welcome your inclusion in our community. Our meetings happen monthly, and we are currently, due to COVID, hosting virtual live meetings. So visit southfloridawriters.org for more information. And now it is with great pleasure that I introduce my colleague, Fernando Cabrera. Fernando Cabrera was born in Havana, Cuba, and immigrated to the United States at the age of 9. For the last 36 years, he has called Miami his home. His fascination with the history of the Second World War and the classical Greek stories led him to write this tale where both worlds collide. Helen's Crown is Fernando's second published book. Other works by Fernando include Valladoro and Dead and Lost, both of which explore his adoptive city of Miami. It's with great pleasure that I introduce my colleague, Fernando Cabrera.
Thank you, Billy. And I want to thank everyone who is logging in. We wish this could have been a live presentation because there's nothing like the interaction with folks, but we will do this, and hopefully we will all be meeting it in person soon enough. As Billy was saying, this is my second published book, and to begin at the beginning, let's just go back to where the story actually starts. In 1981, like many persons in my generation, I sat in a movie theater and I saw a movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. That movie made every single person in my generation think that they could be an archaeologist, or that they could go out and find treasures. That love affair began my search for this kind of book. Along the way, I studied history. I actually was a history major for a while. World War II is the quintessential event of the 20th century. It is the thing that sets up everything. It culminates everything and sets up everything. And at the same time, I've always been a student of Greek myth and Greek stories. There is no greater story in the Greek pantheon than the Trojan War. And it's the Iliad and the Odyssey not only are amazing books, they set the groundwork and they set the tapestry for so much literature, not only original classics, but everything else gets thrown in there. I had the very good luck in probably my second year in college to have an amazing history professor who brought in a lot of the Trojan War into it. And that's why I first heard the name Heinrich Schliemann. And Heinrich Schliemann, for those who may not be aware, is probably one of the most interesting persons that we've never heard of. Heinrich Schliemann was a small town German grocer. He came from nothing. But the man would go around Germany with a small copy of the Iliad. That's how in love he was with the story. And little by little, he becomes a self-made man. He goes through and creates several businesses. He becomes an adventurer. I mean, the life of Heinrich Schliemann is the stuff that Indiana Jones wishes he could have done. Heinrich Schliemann survives a shipwreck. Heinrich Schliemann sells weapons during the Crimean War. He sets up a business during the California Gold Rush. And eventually he becomes a very rich man, very influential man. And at a time where he should have just retired, Heinrich Schliemann decides he's going to become an archaeologist. And so he takes his weather-beaten copy of the Iliad and does what nobody else thinks is possible. He takes the Iliad as a map. He goes to Turkey, which at the time was being ruled by the Ottoman Empire, and he actually begins to follow the maps of this book until one day, lo and behold, he finds walls, he finds pottery. Um, he was also, some people will claim that he was a charlatan, that he was he was the German version of P.T. Barnum when he came to self-promotion. But nobody can argue that the man found a city where a city was supposed to exist. And in that city, one day, he discovers a vast treasure, which he immediately claims is the treasure of Troy. Um, the story goes on in that Heinrich Schliemann then begins a process of promoting that treasure and then going out. And then there's a fight basically going on. The fight comes in where the Turkish government, realizing that this is a vast treasure and could be worth millions of dollars or millions of liras at the time, tries to stop him. And this little man, who everybody always underestimated, goes ahead and utilizes his contacts. Now, his contacts happen to be, he's friends with Otto von Bismarck. He's friends with Disraeli in England. He has friends all over the place. And he goes ahead and he actually manages to win the legal case. The book Helen's Crown takes effect in 3 different time periods. And what it does is it looks at 3 different time periods where the treasure of Schliemann has been a focal point. So we begin the story in the 1870s in a little town in Turkey where he has just made the discovery. Then the story goes forward to 1945. Specifically, the story goes to April 20th of 1945. And for the students of World War II, that is the beginning of the Battle of Berlin. It is one of the largest battles that has ever been fought in the history of mankind. About 500,000 German defenders and about 2 million Russian troops surround the city of Berlin. And in the middle of the city of Berlin, there is a fortress. This is an actual fortress called the Zoo Tower. And wouldn't you know that in the middle of that Zoo Tower are all the treasures of the museums of Berlin. So for those of us who've seen the movies and know the stories, we know that the Germans, as they were going out into Europe and they were conquering Europe, they were stealing everything they could get their hands on. Not only from the museums of Europe, but they were also stealing from the families of Europe. And all of that was being sent into specialized holding areas. We eventually found most of it. But what few people realize is that the Germans were trying to protect their own historical treasures as their empire was collapsing. The massive towers, and there's a huge description in the book about the massive towers and their purpose and how they came about, served as the final resting place for the major artworks of the German museums. This is the stuff that they had before the war. They considered that to be their own property, not the taken property. And so the story shifts to the last 10 days of World War II in Europe and the location of the treasure. Then the treasure disappears from history. Everyone assumes, incorrectly, that the treasure had been destroyed. I mean, the Allies, the British, the Americans, and the Russians did a really good job of remodeling the city of Berlin in the last 15, 20 days. At one point, bombs hit some of the Berlin museums, and there were actually rivers of gold flowing out from the museum. So everyone knew the treasure had been there. Everyone assumed the treasure had been destroyed until 1994, actually 1993. 1993, 1 year after the collapse of the Soviet Union, for unknown reasons, the Soviet Union, Russia decides to announce to the world that they have Schliemann's gold. And it has been sitting in a basement at the Pushkin Museum since 1945. So Helen's Crown is actually a book with a lot of threes and 3 parts. Initially, the story takes place at 3 different time periods, looking at the initial issues with the treasure, what happened during the the fall of Berlin, and then German attempts to bring the treasure back to Germany. Since 1993, the United States of Germany has been trying to recover that particular treasure because they claim that that treasure was not pilfered from anybody. That actually what happened was as the Soviets went into Germany, they did what the Germans had done, and they took treasure back to Russia. So they go ahead and they've been trying to get it. So the story begins at three different times. Eventually, two of those timelines collapse, and the story takes place completely in 1994. In three different areas of the world. There's part of the story is happening, what's happening in Russia with a German delegation, what's happening in Berlin, and part of the story happens in South America. Um, the whole purpose of this is the treasure is used as a MacGuffin. It's actually used as a way to tie major events. The fall of Germany in 45 is juxtaposed with the fall of the Soviet Union that happens in 92. And this is a couple of years later where by now in 94, the Soviet Union has fallen, Germany has unified. So Germany is on the ascendancy, which is what's happening with Germany now. Germany has been a powerhouse. I mean, it's the third most potent economy in the world today. And that all begins in the 1990s when they reunify. So the whole idea of the story has a lot of historical backgrounds to it. There is some fiction thrown in because, you know, we want to protect the actual people here, but it does tell that arching story. So what I wanted to do today is actually just read from the very opening of the story. Again, the whole idea is that just the idea of Troy is such an there's several ideas in the world where they become so important, so overreaching. People dream with Troy. That was Schliemann's dream. He actually thought he had found it. We have now proven that he actually did find Troy. The man was actually a horrible archaeologist. He destroyed so many things. When he would just dig a trench into the mountainside. He was a 19th century aristocrat. He wanted to find gold, pretty shiny things. He destroyed all the pottery on the way in. But let's not take away from the fact that nobody believed that this guy could actually do it. Everyone thought that Troy was actually a myth, kind of like Atlantis, kind of like everything else. We now know that there was a city right where he found it. There were multiple variations of that city, and we know that Troy number 7 actually lines up exactly with the having burned and everything. Whether or not the treasure he found belonged to Helen of Troy or King Priam, we will never know. We do know that it was a lot of treasure. And we do know that if you want to see it, all you need is to take a plane ride and go to Russia and go to the Pushkin Museum. And there you will see about 90% of the treasure of Troy. The Turks actually kept a little part of it back in the day. But there's a lot of that, a lot of that in the book. So what I wanted to do is just give you the opening part of the book. Tucked away in a corner in the Aegean is the gateway to the Black Sea. It is an area that has seen the rise of civilization. It is where the stones are old and tell old stories. Before the concept of Europe or Asia came to be, before legions and phalanxes clashed on this rocky shore, there was a city that will forever hold the fascination of man. The story of the West begins in the Near East, in the windswept hills once crowned by a mighty wall, from which could be seen a vast invading army threatening its peace. Perhaps in a palace behind one of those walls, there once sat a woman whom stories claim was of such beauty that armies and kingdoms fought for her. Perhaps that woman was witness to the earliest story of war and wars lost in the European mind. Whatever the truth behind the tale, the force of the story is undeniable. Troy. The name resounds through the centuries. The small city overlooking the Hellespont has grown with each retelling of Homer's epic. The modest walls have risen higher, and the palaces have grown richer and more luxurious in our minds. But from the beginning, the beauty of Helen has remained an unchanged constant. Of all the cities scourged and forgotten by history, Troy refused annihilation. She rose from the grim reality to glorious tale, which bound itself to men's hearts. There may not have been 1,000 ships, or gods not fighting alongside men. The horse might just have been a metaphor for a trick that saw the invaders breach the walls. Doesn't matter. There was a city. It was attacked. And men to this day remember the day that Troy fell. The myth of Troy led to the creation of the Western mind. Troy was the muse of poets and philosophers. It was the battle cries of generals and the dreams of archaeologists. In the last decade of the 19th century, one man brought Troy from the pages of mythology to the front page of the world's newspaper. It is to the dream of a small German grocer that we have to thank for tying the present so tightly to the past. His methods were destructive, his theories unproven, and his ego greater than any wall of Troy could ever have been. Does it matter? Nations, like people, are proud. When beaten, a person or a nation will look to its past to reassure its worth and existence. History, not the stale retelling of dates or events, but rather the personal connection of the present to the past, matters. Pride in individuals and state is not quantifiable by political scientists, but it is the prime mover of their actions. Pride in our accomplishments, pride in our family, pride in our city or religion or nation. It is what leads to the creation of ideologies that reinforce our pride. It is all that is left to us when we face defeat. At the base level, no political ideology or philosophy can exist without the realization that man is proud, and to maintain his pride, he will do great and awful things. In the story, we begin with, we really don't go into the actual fall of Troy. It is a story that has been told so often in the Iliad, in the Odyssey, in the all the plays of the Greeks and everything else that we've done. We know the story. Even if we don't really know the story that well, we know elements of the story. We all know about Achilles and the Achilles heel. We know about the Trojan horse. We know about Odysseus. What I wanted to do was compare, juxtapose the fall of Germany in 45 with Russia ascendant in 1945, and then use the treasure to bring the story forward 49 years. And you have the fall of Russia in the early 90s, and Germany ascendant. And then I weave a story around that. Why was the treasure hidden? Why was the treasure taken away? What could have happened? So it does offer some alternate historical timeline, and hopefully a fun, fast-moving historical narrative. Beyond that, it's just fun to look for things out in the middle of the desert like Indiana Jones did. And that is the basis of all we do. I mean, we're still Schliemann trying to bring Troy back to life. And with that, Billy, I will go ahead and turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. That was an excellent overview of your great work. And everyone, we thank you so much for watching this recorded segment of our virtual author showcase, our virtual experience. The links to reach Fernando, whether it be on the social media feeds, websites, and of course, to purchase his great works are available in the channel below. In addition, we hope that you'll consider partaking in many of the other events that we have scheduled for South Florida Writers Association. We meet monthly, the first Saturday of each month from 10:30 to 12:30, morning to early afternoon, Eastern Standard Time, for now via COVID virtually. So for more information and to gain access to our meeting, please reach out to us through our website. That address again is southfloridawriters.org. Thank you for watching, and tune in for more segments of our virtual author showcase.